That was just the first half of the lecture, the first link that you guys got. Now this is the second half of the lecture. We're going to start with key components of adaptive immune response. A lot of bacteria evolve. They evolve to a point where they are capable of getting past any defense mechanism that our body has, or even any antibiotic that is available to treat them. So the adaptive immune system kicks in for a specific infection. It is distributed throughout the whole body. We see it in immune cells, tissues and organs, and secreted proteins. So immune cells are the macrophages, the dendritic cells, and the lymphocytes. And there's two main types of lymphocytes, B cells and T cells. And they both begin as stem cells. And remember, a stem cell is just a cell that has not differentiated yet. And that big fancy word, differentiated, means to become something that is specialized. So a stem cell, think of it as just a baby cell. A baby has the potential to be anything. The stem cell has the potential to be almost anything, and the fact that it hasn't differentiated yet. B stands for bone. So in B cells, that's where they mature, is in the bone. T stands for thymus. So without a thymus, you wouldn't have T cells. T cells mature in the thymus. Tissues and organs included in this is the lymphatic system, the lymph nodes, the thymus, the spleen. Your tonsils are an example of specialized connective tissue. There's over 500 lymph nodes in your body. Your thymus, like I said, is a really important organ because it's where T cells mature, and it's located beneath your breastbone, right above the heart, and it is crucial for T cell development. Your spleen is on the left side of the abdomen, and the big function of the spleen is to filter infections from the blood. You can live without your spleen, but if you do not have a spleen, you'll be more prone or more susceptible to infection. The tonsils are a ring around the pharynx, and they destroy bacteria as bacteria enter in the mouth. And you all know you can live without your tonsils. And you can get infection in the tonsils that continues, and your tonsils will stay swollen all the time, and then you would have them removed. Secreted proteins, cytokines are an example. Remember, cytokines are chemical messengers. The cytokines are chemical messengers that send out for reinforcement when things like inflammatory response are occurring. And then you have the complement system. There's 30 proteins in your blood that assist the immune system when there's an infection going on. And then you have B cells. B cells produce antibodies, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. All adaptive immune responses have the three same steps. One, they have to recognize the invader as foreign. Two, they have to work to find out and figure out how to attack that invader. And then three, they have to retain a memory of the invader. And that's those memory cells that we mentioned before. So how does the body recognize an invader? Bacteria and humans both have molecules, called complex molecules, on their surface. The complex molecules are called antigens, and antibodies are produced against antigens. So antibodies produced by B cells bind to the antigen and then destroy that invader. The body has millions, it's exposed to millions of bacteria on a daily basis. And then because of those antibodies that we have, we're able to survive infection. So cells versus non-cells. Our body has proteins and polysaccharides, which is, remember, poly means many, saccharide means sugar, so it's a complex sugar. Large proteins and those complex sugars own the plasma membrane, and they're called major histocompatibility complexes, or MHC. And MHCs are unique for each person. So my MHCs on my plasma membranes are different than yours. And because of that, when you have organ transplants, you can have rejection of organs due to those MHCs. So the MHC says, this is not me. If you put an organ inside of me, that's not mine. Or if you put a bacteria inside of me, that's obviously not from me. So MHC is what lets you know self from non-cells. So how do you attack? Once you recognize that something is in you that's foreign, once your immune system recognizes that, you have two types of attacks, humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. In humoral, you have to remember humoral is B cells. So humoral immunity is carried out by B cells, and B cells secrete antibodies. Cell-mediated immunity is produced by T cells, specifically cytotoxic T cell. Remember that refers to killing cells, cytotoxic. Toxic, is killing, and cyto refers to the cell. So the T cell, cytotoxic T cell, if you have an infected body cell, that's where the cell-mediated immunity is. So humoral immunity, the first one, when the infection happens, B cells bind to the antigen, and once you have the antibody chosen to fight that specific antigen, then you're going to have something called clonal selection. So with the B cells, that B cell is that specific B cell is going to fight off that specific infection, and then that one B cell is going to divide, and that's called clonal selection. In class, we talked about if you have an invader that walks into the door, and I have 30 students in my classroom, only one of those students is going to fight off that invader. That one student is that specific B cell against that invading antigen. So that one student then will multiply rapidly through clonal selection, and memory cells will be made, as well as plasma cells will be made. Remember, plasma cells circulate to create antibodies that circulate in the bloodstream, and the memory cells are left for the next infection. So you've seen this infection one time already. The whole process of differentiation and clonal selection takes some time, so the next time you have the memory cells already there, and you see the infection, and the memory cells come in and fight it off much quicker. So look at the page 702 in your textbook and read through those steps of humoral immunity. So how do antibodies attack? They circulate and they bind to antigens first of all. So circulating antibodies can bind to those foreign molecules, and that process is called neutralization. They also can coat the surface of the invader, and that kind of sends out a signal and makes it a little bit easier for the phagocytes to come and find them and destroy them. And then finally, they can work with those blood complement proteins to put holes in the bacterial cell walls and kill the bacteria that way. So where do they attack? Outside of a cell is the simple answer. They're just too big to enter inside the cell, so they're really only effective against bacteria outside the cell. Now, cell-mediated response. Remember, when you're talking about humoral immunity, we're really talking about invaders outside the cells. When you're talking about cytotoxic T cells, we're talking about killing infection inside the cell, besides just viruses as well as cancer cells. So when a cell is infected, some of the viral proteins go to the surface of the infected cell, and they're just displayed out there. They're kind of a signal out there on the plasma membrane of our cells that something's going on. The cell has been infected. So if we have the example again of the invader, in this case the virus, coming into the classroom, the virus will start taking over the cell, but our cell is smart enough to send part of that virus out to the plasma membrane. So that would be a warning. Think about to the school that our classroom has been infected. So that's a warning that that cell has been infected. And once you see that warning, the cytotoxic T cells can then come in and bind to the viral protein and put proteins onto the surface of the cell that put holes in the membrane. So that infected cell, albeit it's our cell, that infected cell has to be killed off for the good of the rest of the cells. Now, helper T cells help both B cells and cytotoxic T cells fight infection. They can bind to antigens on dendritic cells or macrophages that have engulfed invaders. So then the helper Ts multiply and differentiate and release the cytokines. And remember, those cytokines are chemical messengers. So they are kind of the middleman. They recognize the infection initially, and then they start multiplying and sending out warning signals. And then if it's outside the cell, the infection, B cells come in. If it's inside the cell, then the T cells come in. HIV is an infection that you all know about, and HIV actually works to destroy helper T cells. Now, memory cells can survive for years, but the real answer to that is can survive for years depending on the type of infection that you're talking about. So note figure 3613 on page 704. With this figure, you just need to follow the arrows and go through and know what's happening. So know when B cells would come into the picture, when would T cells come in, when would the macrophages come in, what are the memory cells, what do plasma cells do. Make sure you understand this page. So when all else fails, then you go to the doctor because you've had enough of the infection, and if it's viral, there's not much the doctor can do for you. You have to kind of wear out the infection and just treat the symptoms. But if it is bacterial, then the doctor can prescribe you antibiotics. Antibiotics is a general definition. They're chemicals that help combat infection. They slow down the multiplication of bacteria, and that kind of gives your body the chance to catch up and the immune system to work more effectively. I talked to you guys about the CDC in class, and you know that the CDC is located in Atlanta, Georgia, and they're the governing body, really, of keeping statistics of infections, seeing where there might be outbreaks of infections. And then I had this link for you guys about the superbug gonorrhea. Whenever you hear superbug, that's when scientists begin to start worrying, because that means that bacterium has evolved, it has mutated, it's changed in just enough ways so that it can withstand antibiotics, and that's when things start getting dangerous. When you just have one antibiotic left to treat an infection, you're in trouble. So with this, we always talk about in microbiology that you need to be careful when you use antibiotics. Don't try to overuse antibiotics. Don't use them for a viral infection because they're not going to be effective at all against the virus. As well as just be careful in using antibiotics. Doctors should be careful in prescribing antibiotics because the more the bacteria are exposed to the antibiotics, the greater the chance they're going to gain antibiotic resistance, and that's a problem for everybody. Now, vaccines. All of us had to get vaccines to go to school. Vaccines work to stimulate the immune response. They expose you to the antigens on the pathogen. So it's usually a weakened or killed bacteria in the vaccine, and that vaccine works to create memory cells. I asked you guys to look up for homework what vaccines are recommended for your age group, and we've now talked about this in class, so you should be aware of which ones are recommended for your age group. Allergies occur when the immune system reacts to harmless substances, and most of us have have some sort of reaction to something in the environment in the form of an allergy. Some people have extreme allergies. Some people have milder allergies. Allergies can be seasonal depending on what's blooming at the time. But it happens when allergy-causing antigens, called allergens, bind to, quote, allergy antibodies on a special type of B cell. And that B cell grows and produces allergy antibodies into the plasma. Those antibodies attach to mast cells, and you know from the inflammatory response that mast cells release histamine. And those histamines are what gives us all the trouble. For people with peanut allergies, scientists are now experimenting with giving them small doses of peanuts to see if they could build up an immunity against the allergy. So there's research that's always ongoing about allergies. You probably know of people who have had to have allergy shots to work to combat the release of the histamines. But allergies are not any fun to deal with, as well as the only way really to treat the symptoms of the allergy is just over-the-counter medications if it's something, that you have an allergy related to blooming plants and things like that. Autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease means that your immune system is attacking itself, which is never a good thing. Some forms of anemia are considered autoimmune diseases. Type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is called childhood onset diabetes, and that's where, usually under the age of 2, you develop diabetes. So it's not diabetes due to your diet, it's diabetes due to your immune system attacking itself. Rheumatoid arthritis is a type of autoimmune disease. Multiple sclerosis, as well as lupus, are all types of autoimmune diseases. Now finally, I've touched on cancer, talking about the natural killer cells and the cytotoxic T cells. Cancer is really an infection, if you want to think of it that way, of the cell, where something has happened to the cell so that it no longer is acting in the right way. Your environment can do this. You know about smoking and chewing tobacco and dipping skulls. All are environmental hazards. You've heard about asbestos. This is environmental cancer, maybe cancer causing. Your genes can just get out of control. That is your DNA when I say your genes. And the cell can become cancerous. You can have mistakes in cell division and the cell becomes cancerous. Or you have viruses that cause cancer. For example, the human papillomavirus is known, some strains of that virus are known to cause cervical cancer. Now, natural killer cells and, that should say, cytotoxic T cells kill cancer cells. There are vaccines against some types of cancer. Hepatitis C is a virus that causes liver cancer, and like I told you, HPV causes genital warts and cervical cancer. And there's now a vaccine for boys and girls recommended against cervical cancer with the HPV virus. That's the end of this lecture. You should all have your study guide by now, and you should listen to the lecture. You should study the study guide. The test is 45 multiple choice and 1 discussion. You understand that the inflammatory response is your discussion. If you would like to write up that discussion and email it to me or let me look at it in class, I will, to make sure you have it written down correctly. That discussion is 10 points on your test. Each multiple choice is 2 points. Again, if you have any questions, please send me an email or discuss it with me in class.